Will the secondary scoring please stand up? Well, they did. Big win for the Wild against the Jets. We'll talk about the game as well as some secondary scoring on today's episode of Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild. Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Just a reminder, you can find Locked On Wild on all of your favorite podcast platforms, absolutely free of charge. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Jayden Homuth joins us to talk about the win over the Winnipeg Jets, as well as a look at whether or not Matt Boldy will pick up his play after a recent goal. And we'll talk about the new look third line as well. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. And as mentioned, we've got Jayden Homuth here. He is the owner of Puck Takes. So plenty of takes being thrown around here on today's show. Jayden, thank you so much for joining us here today. Big win for the Wild, first and foremost.
I was hoping they could get some going. I had a feeling that it was going to be bad once Kirill came out, but like we spoke about earlier, they were able to just kind of lock in on the defensive side. And Shaw had that. I really liked enjoying watching Mason Shaw when Winnipeg had the net empty. He blocked a shot. He was able to kind of get up, and as soon as he knew that he had a goal opportunity, you could see him kind of get that little extra energy boost. But Fleury stood on his head today, and what was it, 46 saves I think he had. That was new season high for the Wild goaltenders. I think he won the game for us, essentially, because that was a game we did not deserve to win, and we got 2 points out of it. It was a great game.
Update on Kirill kind of an update on Kirill Kaprizov. Obviously, he left the game late after being tackled by Logan Stanley. No call. And Dean Evison saying he has no update, but saying that they haven't had a full examination of Kaprizov yet, and that will happen in Minnesota tomorrow on the off day. Obviously, it didn't look great, but as Dean Evison said after the game, he said, well, he was able to skate off the ice, so that's got to be at least kind of a good sign, right?
Yeah, I watched the replay. Logan Stanley kind of got up, and you could see Kirill kind of stayed in the form that he was tackled in, and he got up and kind of, I think it was more of his left leg than his right knee. And then he had a breakaway opportunity right there, but he just couldn't get going. But I think anything, Kevin Foligno said it on Twitter, even without a 230-pound human on your back, that's a pretty uncomfortable position to just fall into. So hopefully he's good to go during the assessment tomorrow. We need him. Crunch time comes back in the season.
Yeah, absolutely do. Now it's 2 big points against Winnipeg. Was there anything else that stood out to you from the game? I mean, just going to be one of those games on the second night of a back-to-back. You have to just grind it out, do what you have to do, get a good goalie performance, all those boxes checked. And so the Wild end up picking up the win. But anything that you were able to pull from it in particular?
I think the main message from this game, good teams find ways to win. Right away in the first, you could tell right away the Wild were visibly gassed, and the Jets came out with an offensive onslaught. I think they had 15 shots in the first. The Wild just weathered the storm. Marc-Andre Fleury was the usual, most recent Marc-Andre Fleury, shutting down everything, crazy leg blocks. He was standing on his head early. It was crazy to watch. And then Foligno with his snipe over Hellebuck's shoulder. But Hellebuck recently hasn't been the type of goalie that he has been in the past. So I was hoping the Wild could get some shots on him, but they weren't able to do that. But they were able to score. At one point, they had three goals on 9 shots, which was the reason why we won the game, because the shot count was way in the favor of the Jets. And I know I saw it on Twitter. Brett Marshall had the expected goals. The Jets were in favor of that by, I think, 71%. So, yeah.
Well, again, that's all great for the Jets. I'm sure they're real happy about owning all the stats and coming away with 0 points. So we're happy for him. And yeah, you bring up an interesting point on Hellebuck, because you think of him as just this other world beater type goalie, which he is, but he seems like he's also susceptible to just some weird goals sneaking past him, and that was the case again here against the Wild.
Yeah, that Freddie Gaudreau goal, I was watching it live. He made the save, and he kind of just fell into the back of his net and allowed the puck to go in with him. And that's a goal that you really, really don't want to give up as a goaltender. I feel like all the goals that he gave up tonight were just uncharacteristic of Connor Hellebuck. And I'm sure he wanted every goal wants every goal they give up back, but it's just not a good night for him.
No, and the Wilds definitely took advantage. Winnipeg now all the way down to the second wild card spot. The Wild tied in the top spot in the Central Division. So what a difference it's been from 0-3 to where the Wild are at now. They just continue to find ways to get it done. And as we talked about, another one of the themes will be the secondary scoring. And so we're going to get into that here to finish the show. We'll start after the break by talking a little bit more about Matt Boldy to see if we are seeing signs that line can get going and get him back onto the score sheet consistently. And so we will continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after a word from our sponsor, which for tonight is the exclusive sports betting partner of Locked On. That, of course, being FanDuel. We are down to the stretch run for both the NBA and the NHL seasons. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers, goal scorers, who takes the shots, and who drains the threes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Locked On. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thanks for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out the Locked on NHL podcast to get the full lowdown on all the biggest games leading up to the final week or two of the season. Locked on NHL is available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Seth Topol joined by Jayden Homuth as we continue to take a look at the fallout from the Wild's win over the Winnipeg Jets. Jayden, let's talk about secondary scoring. Matt Boldy, who scored in the game against Calgary on Saturday. Are we seeing some signs that second line is starting to pick it up with Marcus Johansson being added into the mix to where we may see Matt Boldy start to get back on track here as the season progresses?
Yeah, I think he can start to regress again with more speed on the line. Last year, Kevin Fiala obviously brought speed and a lot of skill to that line, and I was able to jumpstep Matt Boldy. Last year, he had 39 points in 47 games played, which was a 68 point pace. I was on pace for 26 goals. Marcus Johansson's last stint here, though, wasn't enjoyed by many Wild fans. You could tell his speed is here, though. He's very, very fast. He moves very well on the ice. And then they almost have a sense like Kirill and Zuccarello. there's been times where I've seen Johansson kind of wrap the puck around blindly, knowing where Boldy would be halfway across the ice. And it's not that Boldy's not shooting; he's shooting. His expected goals per 60 is 1.18, but his goals per 60 is only 0.88. And then this year, after tonight, he's got 42 points in just 65 games played, which is a 53-point pace. And the question that I had for you was, do you think a 7x7 contract was too steep after only 47 games played in a career?
That's an interesting question because obviously there's the comparison between, well, if we were going to give that type of money to Matt Boldy, why didn't we just do it for Fiala? And we're not gonna get into that here because I've spent many shows on that, and that is a multi-day thing to get into. But I did find it interesting that after the contract was signed, that the Athletic, Dom Lashusen, does the report cards, kind of the market value cards for the Athletic. And they had Matt Boldy at that point. Now, it was earlier before his scoring drought started, but they had him at the time that he signed the extension at a $7 million market value right now. So obviously the hope is, as a 21-year-old player, that he's going to continue to improve to where he becomes more of an $8 or a $9 million per year player, to where you say, similar to what we have seen from Joel Eriksson Ek, where you just look at the contract and you're like, he just is worth so much more than what he's being paid. It's just an absolute steal. And I think he'll get there. I think we just are seeing again why having players on that line like Marcus Foligno, as opposed to a guy in Marcus Johansson, who has the speed to be able to do the things that help set up Eriksson Ek and Boldy. Because Matt Boldy's not, the one thing that he really doesn't bring to the table is speed. And so if you put somebody on the line that has that, then he can play off of it. And I think the results of the last few games speak for themselves. Brett had a tweet before tonight's game. Small sample size for the new line combo, but the line of Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Marcus Johansson has been impressive across their first 3 games together at 5-on-5. They have a total of 26 minutes, 16 seconds of ice time together. 1 goal for, 0 against, a Corsi for percentage of 67.8, a 28-10 shot advantage, an 80.5% expected goals for, which again, for the listeners, that's the percentage of time if a goal is scored on the ice, that it is a particular set of players, in this case, this second line. Their expected goals for 2.4, 0.58 expected goals allowed, and their high danger chances are 11-2. So analytically, that trio doing a lot of really, really good things. They're getting from A to B, sustaining the zone, generating chances. It's just that we haven't quite seen them yet go from B to C. When they do, that line's going to be a problem for opponents.
Yeah. And I also think the power play has been struggling massively the last 9 games. But if you're an avid Wild fan, last year the power play was abysmal the entire season. We got Matt Boldy in January, and I have in my notes that his zone entries are so awesome to watch. I think that's a big reason that the power play stepped up this year. Was there's times where you'll see 2 of the penalty killers try and take the puck from Boldy, and he'll sit in the top of the corner of the point and keep the puck in the point and wait for the entire offense to get set before he moves it in. And I think that's just some slight value that he's brought besides this lack of scoring. And I think our power play is a huge jump up from where it was last year because of Matt Boldy, regardless of him putting up points or not.
Yeah, I agree with you there 100%. And recent changes in personnel to the power play, I'm still of the belief that once those guys gel, this is similar to what happened last year, except that the power play wasn't good to start the year, is they had that stretch down the stretch where it was just unbeatable. And so just got to iron a couple of things out, get back to where it was. The difference this year is they're not scoring as much even strength, but then they're also doing all the other things too. So it's not hurting them as much as it did last year. But it is interesting because a contract like that, you're going to assume a particular amount of production for being that type of a player. And so I think Matt Boldy will be there. I think it just depends on who his line mates are. Slow, plotting style. I just don't think that's the way to go about it with him, which is why we're seeing all these results looking much better here over the last few games.
Yeah. I don't know. There's some the power play. The addition of Klingberg. I've watched it, and I know that if you are on Minnesota Wild Twitter, Kalen Addison's a name that gets brought up a lot. I'm with you. I think it'll mesh eventually. Klingberg likes to hold the puck more and kind of manage it a little bit more. Kalen Addison's more of a get it to Kaprizov type of player. You kind of watch him; he'll try and a lot of one-touch passes. But I think if Klingberg can shoot well and get the puck to the net from the point, I think it's hard to find an offensive defenseman that can do that. Another thing I like about Klingberg, now that I'm on the Klingberg topic, is he does things that I haven't seen a Wild defenseman do, like lead a 3-on-2 rush and allow a forward to come in back and have a wide open shot, wide open lane. It's just something that I haven't been able to see the Wild do in a couple of years, which I think is going to be valuable if you can get Hartman sneaking in late in the rush. But I think Klingberg is going to be a good addition to the team, even though he probably will only be here for the remainder of the season. But yeah.
Can we bring up while we're on the Klingberg topic, we got to talk about Bill Guerin's approach to trading for on Klingberg, because
100%.
he was talking to the Ducks general manager, Mr. Verbeek, for weeks about Klingberg. So this obviously is interesting that he has been a target for a while for this team. But the Wild made the offer, and Verbeek said, I think we'll just hang on to him. I think we'll keep him here. Bill Guerin says, sure you will, and hangs up. Just such a flex. And then lo and behold, because he planted that seed with the Ducks, lo and behold, in the 11th hour before the trade deadline rolls around, the Ducks haven't had much in the way of offers elsewhere. And so they realize, well, gee, if we're not going to get anything else, we better take what the Wild offered. And they end up adding the rights to Nestorenko. Thank you. And it's a situation too where the Wild just they look at some of these prospects that they're not going to re-sign then as trade chips. And Nestorenko was thrown in to make it happen. And honestly, I'm of the point that for what he will bring, not only on the power play, but also, as you alluded to, on in 5-on-5 as well, I think that Klingberg deal may end up being the biggest addition for this team that they made at the deadline, which is saying something considering that they traded Jordan Greenway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also like that story for the video that went viral of Billy G running to the phone. And then, so you take that video of him really wanting to get the trade to happen, and then you take the story of him just not caring and hanging up on the GMs. He's such a funny guy. I think it was a great story when I heard that on the radio. But I think Klingberg is going to be the biggest move from the deadline, and it happened right at the top of the hour. Thought the deadline was over. I thought it passed. Never thought Klingberg would be coming over to the Minnesota Wild. I like Sundqvist though. Sundqvist, took a bad penalty tonight, I believe, but I think he's not Jordan Greenway, but he's a good replacement for Jordan Greenway for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think you're right on there, and it's clear that that line has developed a little chemistry. And so to finish today's episode, we'll talk about that new look third line with Sundqvist, Foligno, and Gaudreau because they had a pretty good night. And we'll talk about that as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day, just continuing to rocket up the charts. So thank you to everybody that tunes in on a daily basis. We appreciate it, and we do all this for the listeners. So thank you to everybody that takes the time to listen on a daily basis. We got a lot more coming as the season unfolds. Jayden Homuth here discussing the win and also just some takeaways as we look at the 5-on-5 scoring for the team a little bit. Jayden, let's talk about that third line. Marcus Foligno, Freddie Gaudreau, and Oskar Sundqvist. 2 goals tonight. Gaudreau had one, and Foligno had one. Do you like what you're seeing in terms of chemistry for that group as they come together and get some more familiarity?
Yeah, I like what I see from Freddie Gaudreau anytime. I think that his value is higher than what we have him at. I feel he's a really underrated player, and he can make players around him better offensively, just the way he can handle the puck and seize the ice. I'm glad that Foligno's getting back on the score sheet. He had a really good shot tonight right over Hellebuck's shoulder. I think that he knows that last year was a once in a blue moon kind of year. I think he talked about earlier this year, but he's sticking to the script, and he's paying his dues. And then Oskar Sundqvist, the new addition, big body, long hair, just heavy hitter. I want him to score, but I think it's a good line. I think it's the perfect mesh of speed and weight, and I think that the offense is going to come, and the offense came tonight after Brett Marshall jinxed it on Twitter. But
shout out Brett, huge fans. It's just funny how that stuff happens sometimes. Like for instance, I tweeted, "Oh God," when the Wild acquired John Klingberg, and a few games in, I am like everything short of just going back and deleting the tweet, but I'm definitely like that take backfired quite a bit. But it is interesting because we saw a lot from Jordan Greenway over his time here, and I think the most common refrain was that he was a big body that didn't really use his body enough. Just never saw enough of what we wanted with the physicality. And obviously Bill Guerin wants to have a couple of lines that can be physical for this team to complement the scoring. But Sundqvist comes in and he can do all those things, and it seems like he does them more, which is really all we've ever been asking for.
Yeah, I remember looking at the numbers right when they acquired Sundqvist, and he clearly is more of a producer than Jordan Greenway is, which you'd think you'd rather take that over Greenway. And we're only, I think, 2 games into this little swap experiment here, but I can positively say that I think it's going to work out being good. And don't want to forget about Gustav Nyquist either. I sometimes forget about him just because he's not playing with us right now, but I remember watching a couple of his highlights right when we acquired him. And I think that he brings speed that the Wild haven't had since Jason Zucker, if that makes sense. I watched a game he played against the Penguins, his last hat trick, and there was a video that I put on Twitter. He absolutely flew by one of the Penguins defensemen to notch his hat trick on the empty net. And I think that if Johansson can't step Boldy up come playoff time, we'll see how Nyquist can do come playoff time with Boldy.
Yeah, and it's good to have options because this team is currently winning without my favorite player, president of the fan club, Duham. But again, when he is healthy, he will factor in for what he brings to this team, probably more with this current roster makeup, probably more like a fourth line guy. But then you have all these guys that are going to be able to help between now and the postseason if somebody's banged up. I mean, look at what the Wild are doing with Jonas Brodin right now, allowing him full opportunity to heal and just continuing to just churn out elite defensive outputs. It's a team that has as much depth as you possibly could want. And that was something that I think down the stretch last year, they didn't have as much of, which led to that series against the Blues. But that's last year. This year, depth is elite. Shout out Anson Carter. Elite depth for this team. That's going to be huge.
Yeah, and what comes with depth, though, is the pain for having to sit some really good players, because I know once Brodin comes back and once Nyquist is healthy and once Duhaime is healthy, there's players like Shaw and Dewar and Reeves or Goligoski, who's been good since Brodin was out, and that Spurgeon and Middleton line is untouchable. There was numbers Brett Marshall put out just after this game, but they've been insane. So they're set. But there's players that are going to have to sit that you personally or I personally or Wild fans personally think deserve to play. But that's just how it's got to go. But that's the one problem with having depth. But otherwise, we do have some great depth, and I'm excited to watch it down the stretch. We got about, I think, 18 games left now, and we're not even full potential right now.
Not full potential, and the Central Division is starting to show some warts. Wild now tied in the Central, and so Jayden, let's finish with this. How do you see things playing out here for the Central Division down the stretch? And honestly, here would be a scenario. Hear me out on this. Dallas continues to take on water. There is a scenario that exists that the Wild and the Avalanche pass the Stars, and so then you avoid the Avalanche in the first round, which I think is something that a lot of people would prefer. And whether it be the Stars, whether it be Winnipeg, there is a scenario that exists in which the two teams that have been on top of the Central Division for basically the whole season up until this last month, that they don't finish there. And one of them ends up as a wild card team.
Or one of them ends up not making the playoffs. If it's the Jets, if they keep skidding, I think coming into today, they only had 2 wins in their last 10 games. And they've just been on a nosedive, and it's been really bad. And you could hear during the game, Hellebuck was getting the Bronx cheers, and the fans were booing during the power plays. They just really weren't enjoying it. And I'm going to pull up the standings right now, but I think that the Wild were 10 points out of first place right after that All-Star break, and they had that loss to Arizona, which was very bad. And then they had missed out a point last night, which that's still bothering me, but we got to get past that. But I think that looking at the standings now, we got Dallas has a game in hand on us, tied at 81. They've been slumping a lot. They have the big reason they're up there though is because of 13 overtime losses, which cuts. But Colorado's creeping up right now. They have 3 games in hand on us, 2 games in hand on Dallas. They're at 76 points. They're on fire. What they did to the Sharks last night was insane. Sharks only finished with 13 shots on goal, no goals. Winnipeg's at 75 points right now, sitting in the wild card spot. And right behind him, you got Calgary, who looks like they could be hot. If Markstrom could get back to his play style, if he could play about 80% of the rest of the games how he played last night, I think that the Flames have a good chance to pass the Jets, or maybe Nashville could. But I don't see Nashville passing after selling half their team. I don't see them doing that. They're there looking at it, but I don't think it's possible. But Calgary could very well jump Winnipeg in the wild card race if Winnipeg keeps going on this nosedive, which would be surprising because, like you said, up until the beginning of February, it was Dallas and Winnipeg in the race for first and Central. And out of nowhere, it's Minnesota and Colorado, just like last year.
They were running away and hiding with the division, and all of a sudden, objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. Well, we'll see how things play out. And Jayden, want to say thank you for hopping on. We'll definitely have you on again because this was elite. And for fans, make sure you follow Jayden. His Twitter is shown on the screen. Just some elite hockey takes out there as we move through the rest of the season. Fans, make sure if you have not already, this is the perfect time to subscribe to Locked on Wilds on YouTube, on your favorite podcast platforms, wherever you listen. We are available, so make sure you hop on for the ride the rest of the way. It's going to be fun, and so make sure you stay up to date as much as you can with Locked on Wild. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked on Sports Podcast Network.